So the UAE is refusing to fund students at British universities because they claim that British universities are a hotbed of Islamic radicalisation. And it would be lovely to say, yes, it is. Look, we've seen a big problem. We can solve it. Isn't this shocking? But it's far more complicated than that. They've repeatedly argued, both publicly and diplomatically, that British universities have become breeding grounds for Islamic radicalisation. And it's a serious allegation implying not just isolated failures, but a systemic problem rooted in Britain's academic culture. The real question is it true? Well, maybe to a degree. It's not entirely true, it's entirely not true. They have hosted Islamic extremist radicals. Whether they knew that when they hosted them, not always. But why is the UAE making this claim? Well, to understand the accusation, you do have to understand the accuser. The UAE defines Islamist political movements, especially the Muslim Brotherhood, as an extremist threat. Not because they're violent in all cases, but because they challenge state authority using religious legitimacy. From the UAE's perspective, Islamist activism in universities isn't student politics, it's early stage political mobilisation. Now, the whole route of the police enforcing non-crime hate incidents is exactly the same. So if that's valid, so is the accusation of the UAE. Because non-crime hate incidents founded on the idea that if you say hurty words about someone one day, within a few weeks you'll be committing a genocide on them. That's why we send 6 police officers out to your house when you say so. So when the UAE looks at British campuses and sees Islamist speakers, religious student societies, and activism framed as anti-imperialism, it interprets this not as pluralism, but as doesn't mean they're wrong. The 3 things are undeniably true. Firstly, UK universities have hosted speakers that turned out to hold extremist views many times. Secondly, some student societies, including religious ones, have at times platformed figures linked to Islamist ideology. And thirdly, universities are slow and defensive and inconsistent in dealing with this. How many times do they rush to stop people saying death to the IDF? But does that make it a hotbed? Probably not a hotbed, but a matter. Exposure to radical ideas isn't the same as radicalisation. Universities are supposed to be spaces where controversial ideas circulate, where identity and politics are tested, environments where young people experiment intellectually. If anything, we've not seen enough of that over the last decade. I'd argue that British universities don't strictly radicalise students, but they do confuse inclusion with avoidance, confuse tolerance with non-intervention, and fear accusations of racism or Islamophobia to the point of paralysis, like much of society. Really, this is institutional. But why do the UAE's claims resonate anyway? Well, even if it's slightly exaggerated, they do point at real weaknesses. British universities have struggled to define clear red lines, distinguish faith from political extremism, and to defend liberal values confidently that they don't really seem to believe. And Islamist movements are particularly adept at exploiting moral hesitation, accusations of prejudice, and bureaucratic indecision, which universities are more than able. We just have to remember that the UAE is not a neutral observer. It has its own reasons for discrediting political Islam abroad, pressuring Western governments and framing the UK as permissive and naive. It's not a liberal democracy. Its definition of radicalisation also includes political opposition that's peaceful. So its warnings should be treated as partial but not authoritative. That definitely doesn't mean they should be ignored. British universities are not systematic engines of Islamist radicalisation. They've hosted individuals they shouldn't have. They've been reluctant to intervene because they don't want to make the problem worse. It's an issue of governance and confidence, not conspiracy. So is it a hotbed? No. Is it something that needs closer management and a more vocal defence of liberal democratic norm? Because if universities aren't recognise that pluralism has limits and also allow pluralism of views, people will define the problem. UAE's claims are blunt, politically motivated, and probably overstated. But they are a sign that universities are uncertain, that they fear controversy, and that they've not done enough to maintain centuries of established norms where civil discussion is encouraged but is monitored. And this has crept into the rest of civil society, that words are considered violence, that people can be hurt, that hurting people's feelings is more important to guard against than people reaching a valid decision. We need more debate, not less. But we do need to be open and honest about issues. So in many ways, the UAE's done us a favour, and at least we can discuss the